Hello from the Heartland. My name is Jenna, and this is SmartHER News. News when it matters and why it matters. Our SmartHER series features unique people who help us think and live smarter. You might have wondered once or twice what someone is actually registering when you speak to them. And as a parent of 3 young children, I'm asking this question all the time. Turns out Princeton University just completed a first-of-its-kind study on just this, looking at the brain activity of adults and children during real-time interaction. Researchers call it a new frontier because very little is known about what a child's brain is actually processing when we talk or play with them. As researcher Elise Piazza explained, previous studies in this area often focus on adults and can require a person to lay down and watch a movie or listen to a story during a brain scan, something obviously a 1-year-old would have trouble doing. So the team at the Princeton Baby Lab, a research team focused on how children learn and see the world, had to get creative with their 9 to 15-month-old participants, utilizing state-of-the-art technology. Here's Elise explaining how it worked.
You put these caps on the head, and there are very, very weak near-infrared lights in the caps that essentially pick up on blood flow throughout the cortex of the brain. So in real time, we can measure which different areas of a baby's brain and an adult's brain together are active in response to different tasks, in response to different facial expressions that the baby makes, etc.
I thought it was really interesting in your study. There was a note about certain participants being disqualified for excessive squirming. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, that is wording straight out of the paper. I think we started out with about 60 babies who actually recruited and came into the lab, and we lost close to half of them because they refused to put on the cap. They're at that age where they just won't wear hats of any kind. They don't even notice that it's a neuroimaging study, right? They just see that there's something uncomfortable going on to their head. Others wouldn't sit still within the cap, right? So they're just getting their legs. They want to walk around the room. And the thing is connected to wires. So they have to be able to sit relatively still. And the parents, they're supposed to be silent and not participate in this at all and just kind of hold them comfortably on the laps. But frankly, for some of the kids toward the older end of the range, it just wasn't happening. So
I give you guys so much credit for even getting some of them to do this.
So despite the challenges, the study went forward. An adult researcher and a baby, both wearing their headgear, played together for about 5 minutes. They would play any number of selected games, sing a nursery rhyme like Wheels on the Bus, and they'd all read the same book, Goodnight Moon. Then the adult and the baby would play separately in the same room. The researchers recorded the brain activity, and here's what happened.
We found that they were significantly more coupled with each other, meaning that their patterns of brain activation sort of aligned better with each other when they were directly communicating than when they weren't with each other, which makes sense. And then furthermore, because we had these video recordings and audio recordings of their real-time behaviors, we could also measure things like how sing-songy the adult's voice was over time. A lot of parents have used infant-directed speech, which is basically talking like this, where there's, a really clear kind of roller coaster of pitch and rhythm. We measured how much the adult was doing that at different times, and we found that the baby's brain was actually picking up on when that was happening. So, for example, the baby's activation would go up a little bit when there was more of that kind of motherese and go down when there was less. The adult's brain had a similar response to when the baby was smiling. And one really interesting point was if you look at the relative timing of the two signals, if we looked in frontal cortex, which we know is involved in a lot of social processing, a lot of prediction, the baby's brains actually seem to lead the adult's brains by just a few seconds in terms of the patterns of activation, which almost seems to suggest that the babies are kind of playing this leadership role in the interaction. The way that I interpret it is that as caregivers, many adults know that you're often having to improvise and sort of accommodate to infants' attentional dynamics, which can be wildly variable and unpredictable. So I think it's more like even without being able to speak, the baby is able to influence kind of where the interaction is going to go. And that even shows up on a neural level.
That is fascinating. Did you expect to find that?
I don't think we expected to find that. There is a little bit of precedent. I will say, if you look at some of the adult literature on this kind of like speaker-listener coupling, there are some brain areas in which a listener predicts what a speaker is going to say. So sometimes the listener's brain can actually be leading the speaker's brain, but most of the time it follows because, of course, a speaker has more anticipation of what they're going to say next than a listener. But maybe with kids, there's a little bit more sort of accommodation of their needs than there is when we're speaking to other adults. But that's kind of an interesting question to keep exploring and also explore throughout development, because these were just 1-year-olds. What happens in 2, 3, 4-year-olds?
That's really interesting. And as a mom, I'm thinking about how I often feel like I have no control. And when I was reading this study, I thought that, well, maybe I actually don't have as much control as I think I do, because they are really running the show. Even when I believe I am playing with them and have a certain game in mind that in some ways I'm responding to their cues, and they could be leading me. The baby leader, I can see it as a New York Times best-selling business book that's coming down.
I think it really just reflects good parenting, though, right? You're in tune to your baby's needs. If you were just like running a script and ignoring them completely, they probably wouldn't be able to learn as well.
But it would be easier for me. That's what, at least that's the thing. If we could all just run the script as exactly as we want to, that is the trouble with parenting. You're improvising all the time. What do you think is the big takeaway? And what do you want to do next with this research?
I think the big takeaway scientifically is that young babies, even though they can't talk to us and they have a limited amount of kind of communicative cues, really are participating in interactions at the neural level. We can see a reflection of adult behavior in a somewhat sophisticated way inside their brains, in a way that we can't see just from their outward behavior. And I think this provides kind of a motivation for more and more rigorous neuroimaging research on baby learning, baby communication, because it's a window into their understanding of the world. We can actually, in upcoming studies, we're looking at things like their patterns of activation in response to stories. So what are they actually getting out of a cartoon, out of a storybook? Are they representing something about the characters? Are they representing, little bits of words or syllables? This is a really powerful tool for understanding that when they can't really tell us what they understand at that age.
So I had to ask, how close are we to mind reading, assigning a certain feeling or emotion to brain activity?
We're not quite there with babies yet because, like I've mentioned, there's sort of more methodological struggles there with neuroimaging them. But with adults, we're very close. There are many studies now where you can look at the readout in brain activation from an fMRI scan while someone is looking at faces versus houses or happy versus sad faces. And you can actually predict what the person is thinking about, what the person is seeing, just from looking at the pure brain data. So this kind of decoding of brain representations is a really hot and developing area, and it's getting more and more detailed and powerful with every day.
Quick, concise, nonpartisan, SmartHER news, a refuge from the storm. I'm Jenna. Thank you for choosing SmartHER.